My husband said. If you can't handle me spending weekends with my ex, go to hell. I said nothing, just packed my bag, and accepted the job transfer to Singapore I had been turning down for him. 2 days later, he texted, "What's your weekend like?" I sent a selfie from the Marina Bay waterfront, a blazing city on the other side of the world. The words themselves, delivered at 2:30 in the morning, should have struck like lightning. Instead, they landed cold and heavy, settling precisely on the months of quiet suspicion I had forced myself to ignore. We were in the kitchen of our Denver home. The countertops were granite, the appliances stainless steel, and the marriage itself was, I now realized, just as cold and hard. I am Amber, and for years, I had defined myself by how well I could organize, streamline, and stabilize the world around me. I was a cybersecurity expert. My life was built on logic and pattern recognition. But when it came to Carter, I had purposefully allowed my judgment to dim. Trading my own professional ambition for the quiet stability he insisted we needed. Now, stability was a polite word for suffocation. He stood in the archway, smelling faintly of a floral perfume I had never owned, and wearing the loose, careless posture of a man who knew he could not be contradicted. He had just stumbled in from wherever he had been. The sound of his clumsy steps was the only thing that had broken the silence of the house. He did not apologize. He did not soften the blow. He simply stated his demand regarding his ex, Marlowe, and then delivered the ultimatum with the entitlement of a king dismissing a peasant. I did not scream. I did not cry. My body did not shake. Inside, something that had been tightly wounded for months snapped clean. Not with an explosion of pain, but with the quiet clarity of a circuit finally opening. The emotional response I should have had was immediately overridden by my technical mind. When had he grown so certain that I would never walk away? When had I let him shrink the circumference of my world so completely that leaving seemed impossible? Carter did not wait for a reply. He was already laughing into his phone as he ascended the stairs, dismissing the moment as a minor inconvenience. The kitchen was left echoing with the hollow sound of his carelessness. The moment he was gone, I turned and walked straight into our bedroom. I did not bother looking at the king-sized bed we shared. It felt like foreign territory. I moved directly to the closet, pulling down the large, sturdy black suitcase I used for international business trips. The trips I had stopped taking for him. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an automated reminder from Helion Systems, the international firm I worked for. The project director role in Singapore was still available, still awaiting my acceptance or final rejection. I had turned it down twice, citing the need for marital stability. I had sacrificed a promotion that would have defined the next decade of my career. A position that included a raise of nearly $100,000. For a man who had just told me to go to hell. I opened the email. I read every line of the contract for the third time, but this time, the words were sharp, inviting. A genuine path to a life where I would not have to apologize for my own brilliance. I typed the single word. Accepted. The confirmation email pinged back instantly. I had to fly within 48 hours to make the regional briefing. No extensions, no delays. The universe was closing the door behind me. My hands did not shake as I packed. I included my most essential devices. 3 days of clothes, and nothing sentimental. I was not leaving a home, I was shedding a skin. By 5 o'clock in the morning, the house was utterly silent again. The sunrise had not yet reached the windows. Carter was still asleep upstairs. I walked downstairs for the last time, past the expensive granite, past the empty doorway, where he had delivered his final, toxic edict. I walked to the kitchen counter, picked up the ceramic container, where we kept the spare keys, and placed one single key beside it. Next to the key, I placed a small, neatly folded piece of paper. On it, in clean, black handwriting, were 4 words. Thank you for the clarity. No anger, no accusations, no details he could twist into excuses. I grabbed my one suitcase and walked out the front door, closing it softly. I was not fleeing, I was simply leaving. I was not leaving Carter. I was leaving the version of myself who had tolerated him for far too long. At Denver International Airport, I watched the eastern sky start to bleed into red. When the plane finally taxied onto the runway, I turned off my phone, tucked it away, and felt a knot loosen inside my chest that I hadn't realized was throttling my breath. I was done shrinking. The plane rose into the cold Denver air, carrying me away from the man who believed my loyalty was a permanent fixture in his life. But even as the skyline shrank beneath me, I knew the physical distance was not enough. I needed more than just separation. I needed complete, forensic clarity. I had left the house in silence, but I would not allow him to rewrite the history I had lived inside. 2 hours after takeoff, while soaring somewhere over Nebraska, I pulled out my laptop, my true command center. I logged into the server array I maintained back home. My Denver office, located in the finished basement, had always been my sanctuary, a room filled with the soft glow of monitors and the steady, reassuring hum of the systems I had built. It was the only place in that house that felt completely like mine. Using a secure encrypted connection, I began activating forensic mode on the smart home monitoring system. Carter had always believed the cameras were only for burglars, an expensive toy his brilliant wife had installed. He never understood that the architecture was designed by a woman whose job was to anticipate every kind of breach, internal or external. I started scraping 90 days of data, camera feeds, microphone logs, device usage, and biometric door lock records. I wasn't doing this for revenge, at least, not the messy, emotional kind. I was doing it for justification. I was doing it to confirm that the death of my marriage was not a failure of love, but a failure of truth. The first files to finish processing were the audio logs, organized by proximity to the main living areas. I put my noise-canceling headphones on. The first few clips were mundane cooking noises, a television show. Then came the clip from the evening before I left. Carter was talking to a small group of friends in the living room. His voice, loose with alcohol and confidence, carried easily over the background chatter. "Amber is brilliant, sure," he said, and I braced myself, expecting a compliment, however backhanded. Instead, I heard him add, "But she's like a robot. I need someone who makes me feel alive." Something inside me tightened, not from pain, but from a terrifying recognition. He hadn't just said those words to me in a moment of anger. He had been practicing them, building a defense for his selfishness for weeks. He hadn't insulted me, he had simply stated the narrative he intended to use. Next came the message archives between him and Marlo. They were sickeningly casual. "She's too logical." Marlo texted him one afternoon. "You deserve someone who understands your heart." Carter's response cut deeper than any dagger. "Amber won't notice anything." Notice anything. He wasn't wrong. I hadn't noticed everything. Not because I was oblivious, but because I had been loyal. And loyalty is blind until it's violently forced open. I paused the logs and stared out the small airplane window. My logic, my brilliance. The very qualities that had earned me a six-figure salary and the respect of global firms were, in his eyes, character defects that gave him permission to betray me. This was the true, core conflict. I was leaving a man who had not just stopped seeing me, but had stopped seeing me on purpose, so he could dim my light. I resumed the system review. The camera logs were next. The motion alerts were subtle, tracking a pattern I had dismissed as sensor glitches during my late work nights. One evening, 2 weeks prior, while I was hosting a virtual security briefing for a federal contractor, the system registered motion in the living room and kitchen. The video footage was brief and irrefutable. Carter and Marlo slipped through the living room like ghosts, heads tucked close. Believing the two surveillance cameras facing the common areas were merely decoration. They underestimated the meticulousness of the woman who built them. They underestimated Amber's focus. He hadn't just slipped. He had engineered secrecy. The discovery brought not a fresh wave of agony, but a strange, terrifying calm. The cold, hard stillness that precedes a great storm. All the doubt, all the self-blame I had carried, vaporized. The evidence was pristine. I finally reached out to Marcus Hayes. Marcus was the head of a parallel tech division, and, before that, my teammate on a classified cybersecurity initiative. He was sharp, pragmatic, and the one who had championed me for the Singapore role. He picked up immediately. "Amber, you're on the transfer flight, right?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," I confirmed. I accepted it. "I'm somewhere over the Midwest." There was a long pause on his end. "Good. I always knew you had to get out of there to breathe." The air was too thin. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice level, "I need to know you are fully aware of what this transfer means. I am not resigning. I am leaving Carter. Permanently. I figured." He replied quietly. "You don't take a job like this if you're just looking for a new zip code. You only take it when you're looking for a new life." He asked whether I planned to confront Carter. "No," I said, looking down at the screen displaying the irrefutable evidence. "I'm just preparing to leave him with the consequences." Marcus, a man who rarely offered sympathy, simply said, "That's the most Amber thing I've ever heard. You know, most people want to set fire to the bridge. You just want to make sure the evidence of the arson is legally admissible." "It's not arson, Marcus," I corrected him. "It's natural consequence." As I closed the laptop, knowing I had all the proof I needed, I felt an essential piece of my emotional armor finally click into place. I wasn't leaving because Carter was a cheater. I was leaving because he was a performer, and I was done being the silent audience to his destructive play. I had told Marcus that I wasn't confronting Carter. I was simply preparing to leave him with the consequences. But the truth was, one final piece of evidence remained, and it delivered a blow far colder than the video footage. It wasn't the proof of his cheating. It was the chilling confirmation of his performance. After my conversation with Marcus, I returned to the audio logs from the system I had built. I had scrubbed all the noise and chatter, filtering only for Carter's voice. The newest clip was short. Recorded late at night, after the footage of Marlowe had been captured. He was talking to someone, presumably Marlowe, explaining how he would manage the fallout from the marriage's end. His voice was measured, calculating, as if reading from a script. Aber won't notice until it's too late. When she does, she'll probably just focus on work. If she takes that Singapore job, great. Everyone will understand why I had to find someone who actually cares about me. He paused, waiting for a response. I'll frame it as her being obsessed with her career, distant, cold. People buy that narrative easily when the wife is the breadwinner. That was the moment the last thread snapped. It wasn't the presence of another woman that destroyed me. It was the realization that I had spent years loving a man who was actively writing me out of my own life as the villain. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to dismantle my character and use my ambition against me to protect his own reputation. He had assumed that my dedication to logic meant I lacked emotion, making me an easy target for his self-serving narrative. The evidence of his carefully rehearsed betrayal was the ultimate liberation. There was no more doubt to carry, no more hope to extinguish. There was only clean, hard fact. That afternoon, I walked into the local Helion Systems office in Denver to finalize the immediate transfer paperwork. I moved through the glass and steel lobby, past the familiar hum of servers and the quiet concentration of my peers. It felt surreal. Like visiting a version of my life I had already decided to vacate. While reviewing the final deployment brief, my phone lit up with a notification from my realtor. Carter and Marlowe were photographed at an exclusive ski retreat near Aspen, smiling near a fire pit, glass in hand. They looked like a couple who had shed their burdens and found clarity. The caption, posted by a mutual acquaintance, included a quote from Carter. "I'm on a journey to rediscover who I truly am." I didn't feel hurt. I felt resolved. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was waiting for me to leave so he could look like the innocent man pursuing honesty. I returned home just after 6 o'clock. The house was exactly as I had left it, steeped in a silence that was now charged with my choice. Carter was still away. The moment felt strangely ceremonial. I went straight to my basement command center. I logged into the master smart home console. Using my administrator credentials, I revoked every access point Carter had: security controls, thermostat access, media logs, and eventually, the digital key to the front door. Then, using my advanced key management system, I completely rekeyed the physical lock code on the main doors. I wasn't doing this to spite him, but out of necessity. My departure had to be a fact, clean and final. Without any lingering connection he could exploit or control. As I ascended the stairs for the final time, I moved slowly through the rooms that had once held my ambitions and hopes. The house felt like a museum dedicated to a woman who no longer existed. The woman who had shrunk her dreams to fit his space. I touched nothing, unwilling to leave any lingering trace of my grief. In the kitchen, I placed the house key beside the note. The note was crucial. It wasn't an accusation, It was a refusal to participate in his lie. Thank you for the clarity. I wanted him to know the full truth had been witnessed. But I refused to give him the emotional reaction he craved to make himself feel important. I walked out with my single black suitcase. The cold Denver air was crisp and clean. I drove to the airport, the sky still dark. Every mile I traveled, I felt lighter. At Denver International, while waiting at the gate for my flight to Singapore, I checked a news feed and saw the Aspen photo again. Carter and Marlowe, bright, smiling, giving the world photographic proof of the life he had built behind my back. Proof he never thought I would see, and proof he would certainly regret I possessed. My phone began to vibrate in my coat pocket. Calls from him. Messages piling up, demanding to know where I was, why I wasn't answering, when I'd be home. I stared at the screen, watching the frantic notifications bloom. Gently, tenderly, I powered the phone off. Not out of rage, but out of closure. As the plane doors shut and the long, slow taxi to the runway began, I felt something within me loosen completely. I wasn't leaving Carter. I was leaving the version of Amber, who had tolerated him for far too long, and she stayed behind in Denver, small and contained, while I, the real Amber, rose into the sky toward a world wide enough to hold my full light. The flight was long, a slow progression across 12 time zones that felt less like travel and more like traversing a chasm between two realities. When the plane finally touched down in Singapore, the darkness I had left behind in Denver was replaced by a humid, thick air that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The air smelled of roasting coffee and distant sea salt. A world utterly untouched by the weight and smallness of Carter's presence. I inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel thin, it felt new. Helion Systems had arranged a corporate apartment in Tanjong Pagar, a sleek, modern tower with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling harbor. I walked through the 3 rooms slowly, almost reverently. There were no ghosts of arguments here, no memories of a man who had chipped away at me piece by piece. There was only space, clean and silent, and completely mine. I spent the first day acclimatizing, resting, and preparing. But the next morning, I arrived at Helion Singapore ready to work. The new offices were a dazzling contrast to the familiar halls of Denver. Here, I didn't feel like a bright asset, waiting to be deployed. I felt like the solution they had been waiting for. I was immediately briefed on the regional data security initiative. Every interaction was different. My new colleagues valued this precision and with sys competence. They asked for my perspective, not just my documentation. I didn't feel small here. I didn't feel like I had to shrink so someone else could feel more important. It was the professional validation I had suppressed for years, and it flowed into me like a transfusion. Midway through an engineering sync, my phone, my personal phone, still mostly silent, vibrated with a private alert. It was a digital canary in the coal mine, a notification generated by a low-level trigger I had set up before leaving Denver. Someone in the United States was attempting to access my archived personal files. Using an outdated password configuration I had purposefully left on a decoy server. I checked the source with a sinking feeling of recognition, not fear. It was Carter. My breath stilled for a single, sharp second. He was already unraveling. He was trying to bypass the security I had built, attempting to regain control, or, at the very least, find some ammunition to use against me. The violation was immediate proof that his panic had set in. He didn't care about my safety. He cared only about my silence. I quickly logged the incident, sealing it into a legal file on my secure cloud drive. I was still focused on work when a message arrived on an encrypted app I shared with Marcus Hayes. "He's calling everyone," Marcus wrote, "demanding to know if we've heard from you. He's already trying to push the narrative that you ran off because of career obsession. It's not working well." I messaged Marcus back. "Did you tell him anything?" "Only that you're where you belong," Marcus replied. "And that I don't tolerate him using my department's resources to track you down. He's reckless, Amber. He thinks he's invisible." Then came a message from Sarah Cooper, one of our mutual acquaintances, the well-meaning, but usually gossipy friend. "Amber, are you okay? We heard you just vanished. Carter is telling everyone you abandoned the marriage because you were too married to your job. People are starting to believe him." Her message was laced with a judgmental curiosity, confirming what my audio logs had predicted. Carter was executing his rehearsed narrative perfectly. He was playing the sympathetic, abandoned husband. "I'm in Singapore, Sarah," I replied, keeping the message short and factual. "I accepted a job promotion that I had previously turned down. He knows where I am." Her response was telling. "Wow, you really did leave. I mean, he said things were rocky for years because you were so distant. I hope you find what you're looking for." The message didn't sting. It simply highlighted the insecurity of people like Sarah, who would rather believe a convenient lie about a brilliant woman being cold than accept the uncomfortable truth about a charming man being a coward. They were happy to accept Carter's narrative because it fit the familiar script. That night, alone in my beautiful, silent corporate apartment overlooking the lit harbor, I stared out the floor to ceiling windows. I felt an immense distance, clean and cold, separating me from that other life. Carter was attempting to access my past, both digitally and emotionally, but he couldn't touch me here. I wasn't leaving him because he betrayed me. I was leaving him because he believed that no matter what he did, I would always remain small enough for him to control. My new life, defined by my own choices and my own immense potential, was already pushing back. And I knew the consequences for him were only just beginning to accumulate. My life in Singapore was ascending, gaining altitude and velocity. But the shadows of the past were busy on the ground, creating exactly the chaotic storm Carter had rehearsed. My emotional focus remained fixed on my new initiatives at Helion, yet my detached, analytical gaze was still monitoring the fallout in Denver. I was tracking consequences. A few days after my arrival, a new message arrived from Sarah Cooper. It wasn't full of gossip this time. It was tight with genuine discomfort. Attached was a short audio clip. "I shouldn't send this," she wrote, "but I overheard this at a dinner. I just don't think you should be blamed for him." I pressed play in my soundproof office, overlooking the sea. It was Carter's voice again, recorded during the Aspen trip. He was speaking to a group of people, his tone dripping with self-pity and entitlement. "Aber never knew how to be a wife," he was saying. "She's too logical, too cold, not feminine enough to keep a marriage alive." A laugh, not his, then his again, filled with agreement. She'll never grow into the woman I need. I sat perfectly still, not moving until the clip finished. It wasn't the cheating that had been the ultimate betrayal, it was this, the casual, public dismantling of my character. He wasn't just abandoning me, he was redefining me as fundamentally broken, to justify his own weakness. Yet, the words didn't cause pain, they caused detachment. They were the final, necessary piece of evidence confirming that leaving had not just been the right choice, but the only choice for survival. The messages from my old world began to pile up, charting Carter's rapid descent. Marcus Hayes messaged me with professional concern. Amber, the firm's HR called me. They've launched an internal review against Carter. During that Aspen live stream, he mentioned details about a high-profile client that should never have been public. If they confirm misconduct, suspension is likely. He's reckless, and without you to clean up his messes, it's catching up. Hearing this was a revelation. For years, I had functioned as Carter's invisible cushion. The stable income, the polished background, the silence that allowed his careless confidence to flourish. The moment I removed that support, the consequences he thought he could avoid came rushing in. The world was now seeing his choices without my shadow softening them. Meanwhile, the dynamic between Carter and Marlo was cracking under the pressure. I saw a post from Marlo. She had written a long, dramatic message implying she was heartbroken. Carter still wasn't ready to leave old attachments behind, she wrote, hinting that he was now fixated on me again. The comments section, fueled by the spreading rumors, turned vicious, quickly accusing her of being the reason our marriage ended. Their shiny affair was collapsing under the scrutiny, and they were already turning on each other. Carter's own texts became more frequent and desperate. The calm veneer was gone. I think we should talk. One text read, "What are you doing? Why aren't you answering?" The words had strained, sharp edges. He was no longer demanding. He was pleading, driven by panic, not regret. I spent the evening walking through the Marina Bay waterfront, watching the city glow like it was built from light and new beginnings. Every structure, every corner felt like a reminder that life didn't have to be small or shaped around someone else's fragility. Just before midnight, as I was staring at the sleek glass towers, my phone buzzed with a message that cut through the noise. It was Carter. "What's your weekend like?" That was it. As if nothing had happened. As if I had simply stepped out to clear my head, and now it was time to return to the script. He still believed this was temporary, a momentary disruption, not a complete, final exit. He didn't understand that the game he'd been playing had ended before he even realized it began. I stared at the screen, strangely detached, and felt the final shift. I had already made my silence a statement. Now, I needed to make my reality his consequence. I opened my camera, adjusted the light slightly, and captured a selfie. My face was composed, my hair still slightly messy from the humid air. Behind me, the Singapore skyline blazed. The bright, impossible lights of a city pulsing with ambition and power. My husband said, "If you can't handle me spending weekends with my ex, go to hell." I said nothing, just packed my bag and accepted the job transfer to Singapore I'd been turning down for him. 2 days later, he texted, "What's your weekend like?" I sent a selfie from the Tanjong Pagar apartment, showcasing a world he no longer belonged to. I didn't add a caption. I didn't add a single word. I simply attached the image and pressed send. I watched the 3 dots appear, signaling he had received it. And then, I set the phone face down, allowing the truth to do its slow, precise work. He was the one who had lost something he thought would never leave, and he was finally, remotely, about to understand the scale of his miscalculation. I knew, the moment I sent that image into the digital ether, that I was no longer a person he could contain. The selfie, featuring the Singapore skyline, was my non-verbal declaration of independence. I didn't wait for a response. I simply set my phone aside and submerged myself completely in my work. The contrast was deliberate. My stability versus his escalating chaos. His response, however, was swift and desperate. The incoming messages shifted from casual inquiry to frantic interrogation. He used every communication channel he knew. His texts piling up with panic, anger, regret, and questions he believed he still had the right to ask. Where are you, Amber? Why did you leave like that? When are you coming home? His attempts to establish control were becoming increasingly fragile. He was clinging to the assumption that I would eventually break my silence and provide the emotional explanation he needed to categorize my behavior. But I continued to maintain absolute silence. I refused to grant him the emotional energy required for confrontation. I had seen the forensic logs. I knew his rehearsed narrative. Any word I gave him, he would twist into an excuse or a weapon. My silence was the one variable he couldn't manipulate. This silence had an immediate, positive effect on my professional life. Midway through a complex systems review, Elaine, the head of Helion Singapore, pulled me aside. Her expression was one of quiet confidence. Amber, she said, the U.S. team formally submitted your data modeling last week. The regional board was thoroughly impressed. We are advancing your nomination for the had been appointed senior regional command role. The position was enormous. It was the role that would redefine the arc of my career, the one I had barely dared to dream of, while I was shrinking myself in Denver. It wasn't a promotion, it was an ascension. I accept. I managed, my voice firm despite the profound sense of destiny settling over me. Excellent, Elaine said, with a rare smile. We were certain you would. You've brought a level of focused stability we haven't seen in this division for years. Focused stability. It was an affirmation that the very qualities Carter had scorned. My logic, my control, were exactly what this new world demanded and valued. That same afternoon, the pressure on Carter intensified. Marcus Hayes called me directly, using an encrypted voice line. Your husband is losing it, Amber. Marcus reported. He just called the Helion corporate switchboard in Denver demanding to speak to you. He told the receptionist you were missing, and that he was concerned for his wife's mental state. He's trying to manufacture a crisis. What did they tell him? I asked, completely calm. I intercepted the call, then transferred him to Elaine's executive assistant here, in Singapore. We wanted to make sure he knew exactly where you are, and what you're doing. The assistant gave him a crisp, professional reply. Ms. Amber is currently leading a major regional project, and is unavailable. Please clarify the nature of your official business. The thought of Carter, panicked and demanding. being shut down by a professional gatekeeper who knew nothing of his personal drama, brought a faint smile to my face. He had called the office to prove I was emotionally unstable. Instead, the office confirmed I was a respected executive whose time was not to be wasted. The professional world was seeing me the way he had tried to hide me. I realized that my decision to accept the Singapore job wasn't just about my career. It was about establishing an irrefutable, professional shield. He couldn't claim I was missing or incapable when I was actively running a critical, multi-million-dollar operation thousands of miles away. His next move, however, was desperate and unpredictable. Just as I was leaving the Helion Asia building to attend a regional security symposium at the iconic Marina Bay Sands, I received a short, anonymous text. "Hayes on a flight to Singapore." I paused on the sidewalk, the city lights reflecting in the glass towers around me. He had come here. He hadn't sent a lawyer or a therapist or a friend. He had flown halfway across the globe, driven not by love, but by the gravitational panic of realizing his cushion was gone. The confrontation I had avoided was now inevitable. I took a slow, deep breath of the humid air. I felt no fear, only a cold, hard curiosity. This was not a meeting I had sought. But it was the final scene in the destructive play he had written, and I needed to ensure I delivered the final line. I put the phone in my purse and hailed a taxi toward the hotel, mentally preparing for the climax I had been quietly, expertly orchestrating through my absence. I stepped out of the symposium. The scent of expensive catered food and the low hum of professional chatter still clinging to my dress. I was feeling the effortless joy of being exactly where I should be, only to find the ragged ghost of my old life standing directly in the lobby of the Helion Asia Hotel. Carter stood in the center of the vast marble room, looking utterly lost. His clothes were rumpled from the long journey, the expensive blazer looking cheap against the clean lines of the Singapore architecture. His eyes were wide, scanning the faces, desperate and frantic. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the confidence he had worn like armor back in Denver. When his eyes finally landed on me, across the 50 feet of polished floor, his shoulders dropped in something that was half relief and half terror. He finally understood the gravity of his situation, and the realization had broken through his entitlement. I walked toward him, moving slowly. I felt nothing break inside me. There was no surge of anger, no flush of pain, just a detached, quiet curiosity. It was the feeling of analyzing a faulty piece of machinery. "You left," he said, stepping forward, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You actually left." I didn't answer, simply allowing the silence to hang, forcing him to occupy the space with his own panic. He tried to gather himself, quickly slipping into his rehearsed defense mechanism. "What happened with Marlowe? It didn't mean anything, Amber." I was confused, overwhelmed, pressured by work. He stumbled over his excuses. "I didn't think you would ever walk away for real. I didn't think you'd do this without talking to me." He reached out a hand, a gesture of ownership I immediately denied by stepping back. His fear was palpable now. He didn't say, "I love you." He said, "I need you. I need things to be stable again." I finally spoke, my voice low and even, the tone I used when explaining a complex system failure. "I know what you said to your friends, Carter. I know what you were planning to tell the world about me, that I was cold, that I was a robot. His face paled, the color draining instantly as he realized his privacy had been breached. You don't understand the context, he stammered, scrambling for another lie. Before he could elaborate, his phone began to ring loudly, interrupting his plea. It was Marlo, her contact photo filling his screen. The irony was almost cinematic. Answer it, I told him. My voice was calm, challenging. Answer your current situation. He hesitated, looking at me, then at the phone. Trapped between the woman he needed for stability and the woman he was still trying to keep for fun. He finally swiped the screen. Marlo's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and brittle. So, you're in Singapore chasing her now. You told me she'd never leave you. You told me you just needed time to manage her emotions. You promised we'd figure out the transition. The accusation, delivered accidentally and publicly, destroyed his last illusion of control. He looked at me, utterly defeated. The lie he had built exposed simultaneously to both women and to the murmuring lobby around us. His carefully managed reality had violently fractured. He lowered the phone, his eyes pleading for mercy, for a way out, for the familiar relief of my forgiveness. I looked at him and felt nothing break inside me. I was completely empty of sorrow or rage. I felt only clarity. You don't need me, Carter, I said quietly, the final sentence I had carried with me for days. You need a cushion. I'm not your cushion anymore. I walked past him, moving toward the lifts that would take me to the quiet solitude of my corporate apartment. I didn't look back. I heard his breath catch, but the murmur of the lobby continued around him, uncaring. His chaos was no longer my burden. I was free. Hours later, after I reached my apartment, an email pinged from Helion Asia leadership. They wanted to officially nominate me for the senior regional command role. The proposal was concrete, detailed, and utterly deserving of my focus. As I read the message, it became clear, the real turning point of my life wasn't leaving Carter. It was realizing I had never been meant to stay in the small, carefully contained world he had built to hold me. I had finally chosen the world wide enough for my true self. The morning light in Singapore had a soft, forgiving quality, washing over the sleek glass of my apartment. I had faced the ragged ghost of my past, and now it was time to officially close every door that once chained me to it. I made coffee and opened the balcony doors, letting the warm air rush in. Today would be the day I signed the final documents. An email from my attorney arrived first. The divorce filings were ready. The financial paper trail, meticulously uncovered by my own forensic sweep, placed the majority of responsibility on Carter, who had used joint assets to fund his trips and gifts for Marlo. I felt no triumph, only the quiet clarity of natural consequences. Not long after, news updates confirmed his professional downfall. Carter's company had officially suspended him pending review. His reputation was crumbling in real time, exposed by his own careless actions. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The truth was doing that for me. My lawyer arranged a video call with him for the formal proceedings. When his face appeared on the screen, he looked utterly defeated, unshaven, and stripped of the easy confidence he once performed so flawlessly. Is there any chance we can fix this, Amber? He asked, his voice cracking. I shook my head. I didn't leave because you cheated, Carter. I left because you believed no matter what you did, I would always stay. He had no answer for that. Later that day, another email arrived. This one from Marlo. A short message, shaky in its honesty. She told me she had left him too, realizing he had lied to her the same way he had lied to me. She offered an apology. I accepted it, not for her sake, but because forgiveness is easier when you've already let go. I signed the divorce papers that evening. No shouting, no tears, no theatrics, just a door closing with a soft, final click. Then came the official notice from Helion Asia. I had been appointed Senior Regional Security. Liddy had been appointed Senior Regional Security Lead. A future I once thought belonged to someone braver, now belonged to me, because I had finally chosen myself. Near midnight, my phone lit up one last time. A message from Carter, brief and stark. I understand now. You were never mine to keep. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because the truth was always simpler than he believed. I had never belonged to him. I had just forgotten to belong to myself. Standing by the window, the city glowing beneath me, I realized I wasn't celebrating victory. I was stepping, finally, into the light I had dimmed for so many years. But calm doesn't mean everything is over. Calm is often the moment before the next truth arrives. As I set my phone down, a final message buzzed. Not from Carter, not from his family, but from an unknown number with a Singapore country code. The message read, "You don't know me, but you need to be careful. Carter isn't the only one trying to control the story. Someone else has been watching you since you landed." My heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from recognition. The past wasn't just chasing me. Something new was circling. Something I hadn't yet identified. Something that would force me to face a truth larger than the one I left behind. And just like that, the quiet certainty cracked open. Not into chaos, but into the next revelation waiting to surface.